I'm with you for the next 3 sessions, so I'm going to stay right here on the stage until the next one comes up.
Webit Global Community. We continue the important topic about cybersecurity and ethical tech in the next panel discussion, moderated by Leisha Santorelli with a special guest of Webit Impact Forum, whom she will present to you in a moment.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Let's all take a seat. So I have a distinguished panel of 3 gentlemen with me, and so from left, I'll start from my left. Andreas Pankow, CEO at DGC Switzerland. Then we have Tommaso Gagliardoni.
Very good.
Thank you. Cryptographer and quantum security expert at Kudelski Security. And on my right, we have General Robert Mazzolin, Chief Cybersecurity Strategist at RHEA Group. Welcome all, and thank you so much for joining us today at Webit. So we only have 25 minutes, so let's get into it. I want to start off with you, General Robert. Can I call you Robert?
Yes,
Is that
Rob,
okay?
That's fine, thank you. Please.
So in the last panel, we had quite an extensive conversation about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as well as what threats that posed. In your view, what is the cyber threat landscape at the moment? Is that the most pressing threat that we're facing at the moment, or are we also seeing other cyber superpowers like China posing a great threat to democracy and other ways of life?
Yes, well, thank you very much. First, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this forum. Yes, it's a very complex question, and actually when we look at it, and this is probably one of the issues we need to keep in mind, there's a tendency, certainly among this community of practice, to look at this through a very technical lens, whether it's cyber. However, we need to look at it in the context of the broader nature of struggle. Militaries, warfare, effectively represent an extension of political will of a nation and a nation state. So in the last number of years, certainly the doctrine has evolved such in terms of asymmetric power, asymmetric capabilities, hybrid warfare, and what you see happening in the Ukraine is perhaps the most recent manifestation of that, where you're looking at activities, kinetic activities, traditional kinetic conflict, combined with cyber and informational effects, and in being able to do so, given the lack of international jurisprudence in the cyber environment, it enables a state to provide a very calibrated approach to escalation of force, and that's what we're seeing. By good fortune, our Ukrainian friends are defending themselves very well, but it actually represents, the future nature of conflict. When we look at cyber, space, in conjunction with kinetic capabilities, and also at the nation-state level, strategic struggle between nations. So there's quite a bit to unpack there.
And Tommaso, in terms of the increased digitization of societies all around the world, accelerated by the pandemic, we've seen an uptick as well in cybercrime, in illegal, illicit money funds and flows, using, again, certain well-known, fast-growing platforms. So how bad is it? Or how should we be worried?
That's a complex question, I would say, but what we have seen is definitely an uptick in crime related to digital heist, we can call it, both from the financial sector, but also in terms of large-scale military operations. And when we are talking, for example, about ransomware, that really is a thin line between independent actors trying to gain personal advantage, and state-run operations aiming at crippling critical infrastructures of enemy countries, for example. So we have definitely seen a race in this kind of issues happening, facilitated at some point by the extreme interconnection of society and the possibility of anonymous payments.
And quickly, do you think governments, corporations, and people are doing enough to protect themselves?
You can always do more, right? But in general, I think not enough is being done right now. Probably because society somehow is slow to react to technological changes. So defense is always a little bit struggling behind. The attackers always have an advantage in the digital realm.
Regulation, governments, and as we'll move on to ethical frameworks are also lagging behind. So on your point in terms of the cyber threat, Andreas, you have a background in investments and dealing with high net worth individuals and families. In terms of the cybersecurity world, and again, the fact that not enough is being done, what opportunities do you see there?
Well, I mean, this is, as you said, the digitalization overall went too fast for everyone out there. I think everybody, companies, organizations, governments, and individuals underestimated the pace with which we digitalized processes. And now, I think Corona even accelerated that, because all of a sudden we had to digitalize elements of the value chain that weren't digital beforehand. And old economy companies all of a sudden started things like e-commerce shops. Everybody was working remotely. And now you have an industry that is a very fragmented industry and one that is growing exponentially as well, because the demand for cybersecurity services is extremely high. So when you look at that from an investment perspective, that the demand to invest into that industry is also very high. Then again, the industry is a very young one, so the possibility of the opportunity to invest in listed companies where you have an external view from analysts and so on is limited. So that kind of forces individuals to invest into non-listed companies, which then again requires a certain level of due diligence to do on your individual particular level.
And yet, technological progress continues to march forward, and sometimes at rapid clips. So let's talk about a really fascinating area, quantum computing. Tommaso, could you give us a quick background for those who are unfamiliar in the audience? What is it, and what can it do? Are we talking about supercomputers here? And where are we? What stage are we at in quantum computing?
So I actually provided a couple of slides for the technical team.
Oh, great.
So if we can have them on stage.
So as they bring those slides up, looking at the screen right there, the quantum computing holds obviously a lot of promise for humanity, but there are huge concerns about this double-edged sword, as well about the potential to cause huge damage to humanity as well.
Right, that's correct. So when we are talking about quantum computing, we are talking about some technology that is currently at the early stage of development, I would say. So in fact, we currently do not have powerful quantum computers to impact digital life in any tangible sense, but the progress is accelerating very fast. And the problems with quantum computing, which, let's recap very briefly, is a new way of manipulating information using quantum mechanics. So instead of 0 and 1, using laws of quantum mechanics. The promise of quantum computers is that these machines would be able to solve certain type of problems much faster than the most powerful non-quantum supercomputer that we have available today or that we will have available in the foreseeable future. So this technology has a lot of applications, but it is also ripe with disinformation, right? So very often when you talk about quantum computing, people think of some kind of magic. So very quickly, we have to demystify what quantum computer is. So first of all, building this kind of machines is very difficult because the engineering effort scales up in a very difficult to control way. The current computers, the current technology that we have is only stable for a few milliseconds. So just imagine having a powerful computer that you can only use for a few milliseconds, and then you have to reboot it. I mean, not very useful. Furthermore, even from a theoretical point of view, there is no strong evidence that a quantum computer can have more than a modest speed up for many problems. And we only know very few problems that can efficiently be solved with a quantum computer, but not with a classical computer. There is more to that. When we talk about quantum computers, there is this fascinating phenomenon of entanglement, which consists in, separating two physical systems very far away in the universe. Just imagine you have a box, you split it into two parts, and you send it to two sides of the universe, and then whatever happens to one of the boxes immediately affects the other box on the other side of the universe, which is amazing. And then people think, okay, this violates Einstein's general relativity, or this allows to do teleportation. Nothing of this is true. But then why are these interesting, these quantum computers? Where there is two reasons, which I will go through very quickly. The first one is that modest speed up for practical problem translates to huge speed up in certain specific instance of this problem. And this has a lot of applications for chemistry, AI optimization. The other problem that is more related to the cybersecurity realm is that those few problems that can be attacked with quantum computers are actually very, very important because they are at the base of all the cryptography that secures our digital infrastructure. Luckily, there is two countermeasures. One is quantum cryptography, that it suffers from certain drawbacks and it is more suitable for a long-term scenario. And the other one is quantum-resistant cryptography, which instead should be adopted by the business as soon as possible, because otherwise it's going to be too late. If you wait until quantum computers are able to interfere with your business and you have not started now to adopt quantum-resistant cryptography, it's going to be too late for many applications.
So that's,
we can skip this.
So that's really, fascinating. And also, when you were talking about entanglement just now, let me just say I was like that emoji with the brain exploding a little bit, because again, it felt a little bit science fiction there, but the real-world applications are fascinating. Robert, I wanted to ask you in terms of the risks associated with the advancement of areas like quantum computing. Would it be fair to say that US and China, when it comes to exascale supercomputers, quantum computing, they're ahead, and that some of the risks associated with this could include things like creating new materials for warfare, human DNA or genomic manipulation, for example?
Yes, I would say quantum, among a number of emerging disruptive technology, we start looking at artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum, cloud computing, the next generation 5, 6G technologies really are fundamentally at the core of international strategic struggle. And what we look at is we see superpowers like China investing tremendous amounts of effort and resources into developing these capabilities. Fundamentally, a nation's ability to survive internationally is going to be dependent on its ability to innovate. And these emerging disruptive technologies that fundamentally shape the way we live is going to be at the very core of that. So we start looking at artificial intelligence, which really is one of the driving developments in terms of in our data-driven environment, how we collect that data, how we manage that data, how we manipulate that data to societal ends. There's a number of second and third order consequences that we have to devote great care to considering. We start looking at authenticity, the accountability in its use. Although, for example, in the case of a search engine in Google, responding incorrectly to a request, because in the early days of AI right now, and we're getting into a new...
Oh, just a second. Are you referring to the Google engineer who claimed that its AI was sentient, or are you speaking more broadly?
No, I'm speaking more broadly,
Okay.
and we can get into a whole discussion of transhumanism and down the road. But what I'd say is that we start looking at the nature of the implementation, of the manipulation of data. It really has to focus on what is at the essence of benefiting society. When we start looking into the area of autonomous weapon systems, where fundamental decisions and the underlying value constructs that are driving the development of algorithm development are at the core, are representative of our societal value structures.
So AI biases.
AI biases, that's one way, but it's also even more fundamental than that in terms of people programming that, in terms of what are societal values. We're looking at mission-critical systems upon which lives are dependent.
So on the point around artificial intelligence, Andreas, where are we on regulation? Where are we in terms of ethical frameworks?
You know, I think if we look at that topic, we are not where we should be. We are currently, and again, coming back to what we said earlier, digitalization also comes along with generating an endless amount of data. And the question always comes, is it necessary to collect that amount of data? Huge piles of data getting stored somewhere by someone. And I think we need to take that back in society and within companies and take an over responsibility to asking ourselves, do we need to store this amount of data? Do we need all this information to provide a service to someone? Or is it just an overall collecting of data and then look at them later and find out what to do with it? I mean, if you look at the pandemic and the amount of data that got stored throughout that phase by governments, by companies, and you know, now you look at it and say, like, so what to do with all this data? So I think, you know, there are two effects. One is companies, governments need to take responsibility and ask themselves, do we really need this data, and behave more responsible? And then when it comes to AI, those companies and those people behind the technology who program that every day, they need to ask themselves at an early stage when they program software, does the software really need throughout the development phase that amount of data at a later stage to really run properly to provide the service it is supposed to provide?
Tommaso, do you agree with that assessment? Do you think that data ethics or ethics in AI, does it work? Is it where?
So first of all, I totally agree with what Andreas said. I mean, I really think that this vast amassment of data that we have been collecting since 9/11, basically, it is part of some sort of FOMO from regulators. So, right, so are we missing something? Maybe better to record everything, amass everything, because one day this might be useful. This doesn't work, okay? This is really a toxic asset that is not only useless, but it can be harmful because it it makes you a more appetible target for data theft and so on. So now, clearly, regarding your questions about AI, for its very nature, and we have seen the talk this morning, I mean, it requires a large amount of data for training. The question is, I mean, how much is too much, and what about the quality of this data set? So this is questions that we have to answer, and eventually we have to tackle the problem of AI ethics, but not from the point of view of let's make a law to make sure that AI is good. This is what I've seen so far. I think this doesn't work because AI is at the end is a technical construct. We should rather make sure that we have safeguards in place for the collection of data that fuel AI models. That said, there is much more complicated problems that I'm not even an expert in, but if we are talking about the long-term future of AI, there is a lot of research ongoing in alignment. What does it mean? Making sure that eventually, if some mindful AI is created, then it's going to have the same goals that humans have. Because if we are not aligned on this path, then consequences can happen that are difficult to control for us. That said, yeah, data ethics, important topic, but I don't think we are going in the right direction with a lot of work that has been done so far.
You sounded a little bit skeptical there about sentience. But Robert, I'm going to come back to you since we touched on it with you first. There are those who believe that it's just a matter of time, that one day it will happen. What then, in terms of the frameworks, in terms of, again, what we were discussing around an ethical framework, around there's some 5 key principles, for example, ownership, transparency, privacy, intention, outcomes. You had mentioned authenticity and others. So when we are confronted with that, when it comes to AI, possible sentience down the line, what do you think we need to, what place do we need to be at?
There are all sorts, depending on who you speak to and what academic papers you read, there's a number of different forecasted timelines for effective AI development. And I would offer in the current stage here, what we see is that, you know, although there's tremendous power in the technology currently, it struggles with context. And so there's always a need to maintain the human in the loop. And I would say that's one element now in terms of developing that. When it goes back to the issue of underlying value, basis of values driving the development.
Moral values.
The moral, this is some of the challenges that we'll have internationally, is in terms of really what are the fundamental bases? Is it a religious basis? Is it a utilitarian basis that drive this? Is there a, what is the fundamental driving value set that will be at the core of this? And this is where we start to run into international structure between the East and the West, and products that are being developed internationally, commercial and multinationals that are driven that are supported and financed by different countries, or some authoritarian, some Western liberal democracies can drive that in a different direction. So, you know, international regimes where we work through these issues so that products that are marketed around the world, or capabilities that are delivered in support of societal resiliency around the world, that there is some harmonization in terms of capabilities.
So let's move on to something a bit closer in terms of timeframes, which is Web 3.0, which is the web, next evolution of the web, and the promise that brings. Andreas, what new challenges and opportunities do you think Web 3 would present, and with regards also to cybersecurity and privacy?
We talked about the challenges, and I think data protection is one of the challenges, because the digitalization will accelerate through Web 3.0, and the automation will be one effect that will allow systems and organizations to generate even more data. And I think it is necessary that the awareness amongst all participants in the web increases how sensible data is, how easily it can get lost and harm individuals as well as organizations. I mean, if I look at our analysis amongst companies, how much data is already lost, thinking about what that next step will mean, then I think one thing is increase awareness. The second thing is that cybersecurity needs to find its way into the blockchain, obviously, to protect blockchains and the security level in that field. So I think a lot of development needs to happen there on a technological level as well as on an individual level to see all the advantages that come with it. And then we can enjoy and benefit from the advantages. But I think until then, there are a couple of steps that need to be made to really have the positive effects.
So when we talk about blockchain, I know that many at this conference are very familiar with it, but in terms of the mainstream, be it an auntie living in Devon, England, or a farmer in Vietnam. There's still a lack of understanding, again, around the complexity of it. But what is also really complex is cryptography. Tommaso, could you just share some thoughts about cryptography? What are some of your insights into what it is, how it's more than blockchain, and the dilemma it poses around privacy?
Right. So before the advent of blockchain, cryptography was really a niche topic, right? You couldn't go in a bar and talk about cryptography. Now you can. But before this was not the case. Cryptography traditionally has been used to protect privacy of information, authenticity, secrecy. And these are sensitive topics because until the advent of mass computing, these features were only available to militaries and governments. And now, back in the 90s, we had the crypto wars, and suddenly military-grade encryption was available to the masses. And this has brought some dilemmas, right? Because if the farmer can use cryptography to secure their legitimate communication, then also terrorists can do the same. And so this has brought the question, okay, why don't we
please continue the
Why
point.
don't we invent a new type of cryptography that is secure for the citizens, but it also allows governments and agencies to intercept illegal material? This is a utopia. So as a cryptographer, I have to be clear with this. This cannot exist. And I think we, as a society, have to decide whether we care more about freedom of speech or if we care about something else, because you cannot have both. If it's secure for the farmer, it's also secure for someone more evil.
But there are a lot of people who want to have their cake and eat it at the same time. They do
That's
want
true.
both. Okay, so quickly for all the panelists, Robert, I'm going to start with you. In terms of a vision for a future society driven by responsible and secure innovation, technology, what do you see? What would you say is the most important thing to you in terms of focus point?
I'd say when we start looking at the number of the technology, you just mentioned Web 3.0, in practical terms, when I see coalescing the many disparate and rich technologies, I look at it more in Web 2.5. So although the aspirations of a democratization in the world to be able to support bringing a significant portion of the global population out of poverty, raising their standard of living is laudable. There's an element of strategic struggle associated with that, and we see that, and this is where competition for resources, increasing population. This is at the basis of international power competition. So it becomes an issue of developing the governance structures. We really are in a competition of different ideologies, West versus the East, in terms of looking at technology as a means of asserting strategic power. How can we temper that? What are the global governance structures that we need to put in place to be able to benefit all equitably and allow our technology to move forward?
And Andreas, your vision for when it comes to technology for good, for more equitable future society?
I think in a digital world, cybersecurity needs to be part of the decision-making process in organizations, corporations, for individuals, and the awareness of the risks that are associated with it. Data protection we talked about earlier, and if we all pay enough attention and make it a priority in this digital world, then I think we can all benefit from it, but there is a lot that needs to be done till we reach that point.
We've covered a lot of bases in a very short period of time. I just want to say thank you to the panel of guests, Robert, Andreas, Tommaso. Thank you very much. A round of applause for our distinguished panel.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Tremendous pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think I'm going to steal this water.